Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I can see here quite a few representatives of partner companies, which is pleasing, from different countries, from different regions of the world, and it tells you that this venue of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum is one of the key venues to discuss energy issues. Let us take a look at what has happened in the gas markets in 2016 and in the early 2017. Let's take a look at the gas market globally, and let's take a look at the gas market in Europe, Asia, and somewhat in North America. In 2016, the volume of the global gas market grew by 5.5%. At the same time, the ratio between pipeline transport and LNG transport is 69% to 31%. So this correlation of 70 to 30% has been quite stable of late and has not fluctuated significantly. We all know too well that LNG and pipeline gas are, after all, different kinds of the transportation of methane. In one case, it is pipeline, and in the other case, there's the gas ships. There is a good dependence between the suppliers of gas for a certain distance and understanding at which distances pipeline transport is competitive and at which volumes and distances the LNG is more competitive. Of course, understandably, the longer the distance, the more attractive would be the less attractive would be the pipeline. But with the increase of distances and volumes, pipeline might be more feasible economically speaking. So this correlation of 70 to 30% tells you that most of gas is being consumed at distances of 4,000 to 5,000 kilometers from the production sites, and the bulk of gas sales would be pipeline supplies. Undoubtedly, when we are talking about LNG and the growth of LNG sales, we see that the market is becoming more and more global, and more countries in their strategies rely on this particular energy source. Since we're talking in the relative numbers and relative growth rates of 5.5% of the market, we understand that in absolute terms, the volumes of sales of LNG, with the preservation of this proportion of 70 to 30, of course, also grew. For Gazprom, the key market is the European market. It is #1 market for us. And we have been working in this market for almost 50 years now. And of course, to us, it is a pleasing fact that the dynamics of consumption of gas in the European market in 2016 grew, and grew quite significantly. The growth of the European market was 6.9%. At this, the volume of imports in Europe grew by 11.2%. So, as you can see, imports grew more than the volume of consumption. And due to a number of factors, primarily this is a factor which is well known to all of you here, the growing deceleration of gas production in European countries themselves. That is first, and second, the fact that gas is taking more and more share in power generation. And if you talk about the European market, then in the power generation in Europe, the volume of consumption of gas grew by 8.4%. In 2016, which is actually higher than the growth of consumption in the European market in general. Some of the European countries also demonstrated quite impressive numbers in terms of reducing the coal generation, like in the UK. Just in 2016, the share of coal power generation went down from 23 to 9%. And the main growth there was the substitution of coal with gas. Gazprom, in such a situation, was growing its sales to Europe. And you know that in 2016, we had a record year in terms of the absolute supplies of gas to Europe. We supplied 179.3 billion cubic meters of gas, which is 12.5% more than in 2015. However, a more impressive number is the absolute growth of gas supplies in 2016, which is 19.9 BCM of gas. At this, the tendency of growth of export sales is even higher, and we see that the trend is upward since the beginning of 2017. Gazprom grew its gas supplies to Europe as of January 1st of this year for the same period of time by 9.5 billion cubic meters, so 13.3% more than in the same period of last year, which means that in annual terms, just during 1 year and 5 months, the volume of annual supplies of gas by Gazprom to Europe grew by 29.4 billion cubic meters, which is almost like 30 BCM of gas more every year is supplied by Gazprom in this year and last year than in 2015. Noteworthy, 29.4 BCM is 53% of the design capacity of Nord Stream 2. We are going to commission this pipeline in the end of 2019. But before that, we only have slightly more than 2.5 years. Now, if the growth rates of gas sales and demand for the Russian gas would continue as we have witnessed in the last 18 months, then probably even Nord Stream 2 would not be enough to satisfy the growing demand for Russian gas in the European market. At the same time, with the growth of our supplies of gas to Europe, we also see that more gas is being supplied by Norway, the Netherlands, and Qatar. And Qatar, in 2016, sold 4.4 BCM of gas less than in 2015. The reason for that is quite well known. The outflow of such supplies from the European market to more marginal and profitable Asian markets. And this is a tendency which continues, which is also reflected in the volume of total LNG sales in the European market. The drop in LNG supplies to Europe in 2016 was minus 1.9% or 1.1 million tons. Of course, I should note here that the volume of supplies of our gas, the growth is for the countries which are the target countries for the Nord Stream 2 project. Primarily in such countries as Germany, we see some growth in the offtake, which was 10% in 2016, and actually came almost to 50 billion cubic meters, so 48.9 BCM. But more impressive would be the sales of gas to Germany this year, 15.6% more, or plus 3 BCM only in the first 5 months of this year compared to the same period of last year. We also had quite high growth rates in 2016 for such markets as the UK, France, the Netherlands, Denmark, Austria, and Poland. Apart from some absolute records or a record-breaking year in absolute terms, we also had other records. Last winter, Gazprom, for 4 months in a row, was hitting records in terms of monthly supplies of gas for exports. First in October 2016, then November, December 2016, and then finally in January 2017. The volume of export supplies in January 2017 was 19.1 billion cubic meters of gas, which is the absolute record. But even more impressive would be the daily supplies. On January 27th of this year, we supplied to the European market 636.4 million cubic meters of gas, which is the peak volume of supplies, which is by 100 million cubic meters more than the corresponding peak day of 2016, of the previous winter from 2015 to 2016. Now, what do we see today? Today, on June 1st, the sales of gas to Europe are 543 million cubic meters. And you know, in Gazprom, we have a joke. Regardless of whatever weather we have outside, we would say that it is the eighth month of winter now, because indeed we are talking about really winter season sales and volumes for Europe. We have never before had such volumes. Of course, to us, as the reliable supply of gas would be pleasing. But of course, we also understand that the appropriate infrastructural projects must be launched within the deadlines or by the deadlines that we have in mind.
As for last winter, I think we need to focus on the following situation. In some European countries on certain days. For Germany, it's January 24, for example. And you know what's been happening there. Renewables. As for renewables, the daily demand was only covered for 4%. If you remember what happened in Austria, when, for example, gas was supplied fourfold as compared to the levels, let's say, usual in winter and autumn. And we know what happened in France and Italy when, for example, when it was extremely cold in these countries, some nuclear equipment were decommissioned and they needed more gas. And what's most important is that in the long run, there was a new record was set on minimal gas reserves in European storage in the beginning of the second quarter. About 25% was left of gas in underground storages in Europe. And no doubt, within the framework of cooperation and dialogue that we've established with our partners and partners that buy our gas in Europe, we are going to focus even more on injection of gas in Europe. And already now we realize that gas demand in European storages next winter, coming winter, in 2017-2018, will be even higher than last winter. So what impact did it have on prices? Mr. Grivach, in his introduction, already mentioned what spot means. And given such conditions and peak demand, the situation on the spot market was the following. Well, first of all, spot platforms and sites showed illiquidity. There were no such volumes of gas on spot platforms, spot sites. That's number one. Number two, it was immediately reflected on the upgoing trend. Prices went up, and prices on spot sites were significantly higher than long-term contracts prices in Gazprom. And actually, in fact, we're talking about dozens of % as compared to spot prices. Next, if you analyze spot market, then we already noticed that even though we talk a lot about sports and it's another try to get rid of this dependency on oil prices, and if we take a look at all of this, we can see that actually they are within the range and they are in line with oil quotes. So what can we say about spot trading? Only one conclusion: spot trading in European hubs is not reliable. This is not stable. This is not a stable source for pricing. And we know many examples from last winter in particular. As for our gas transport Gazprom strategy, no doubt this strategy is linked to gas production centers. Gazprom has been working in several regions, and one of the regions was key for the past 40 years. We're now working in Yamal. From year to year, we're increasing volumes in different fields in this area, and we have some key fields in Yamal region. But this also means that for a long time now, and recently, we are working on the infrastructure, trying to deliver gas to our consumers. Babanenkovo, Ukhta 2, Ukhta Tarjok 2, and the North Stream is one of the. This corridor is becoming one of the priorities of ours to distribute gas for Russian consumers. This significantly changes stream schemes, and that's how the central corridor that used to be the major one is becoming less and less loaded, which means the situation there is becoming more relaxed. And I'm talking about the Uzhgorod destination and then Europe. So since there's less burden on the central corridor, it means we can redirect our gas and gas distribution capacities from the central corridor. So we've been working on this for quite some time now. So at the expense of decommissioning of some capacities by 2020, we can save $1.6 billion. As for reprioritization, we have changed some priorities on the territory of the Russian Federation, which is actually basics. Of course, it is logical that it has impact on export, gas export. As for this North Corridor and Babanenkovo-Ukhta Tarjok, this corridor is becoming a major one to send gas to Europe. And Nord Stream project and Nord Stream project 2 is a logical extension of Nord Stream and corridor in the Russian Federation. If you take a look at, well, not the map, but if you take a look on the photo from the space, you can see that from Yamal to Greifswald is just a straight line, which actually 2 kilometers shorter than the gas transport line through Ukraine to the European market. As regards our new main pipelines in the northern corridor, I must mention that we're talking about gas pipelines. They're top-notch and they're the best in the world. And I'm talking about gas pipelines with 120 atmospheres pressure. What does it mean? It means that there's a longer distance between compressor stations. It means that we have fewer compressor stations, and in the long run, we have to use less metal and less hydrocarbons. If we compare main pipelines with 120 atmospheres and 75 or 55 atmospheres, no doubt they are much more efficient from the economic standpoint and in terms of transportation of gas. And Central Corridor, main pipelines there, they have 55, 75 atmospheres. So the pipelines that we already commissioned and that we're already building, if you compare them with the ones with 75 atmospheres, the economic efficiency is 3 times higher. And if you compare it with 55 atmospheres pipelines, it's 6 times higher. Without a doubt, we probably should go back to gas supplies to Europe through the Central Corridor. What we've been working on, optimization of gas capacity in the Central Corridor, logically it will result in the following, that by 2020 capacities best for Gazprom on the border with Ukraine will amount to 10-15 BCM per year. If you compare economic efficiency for Gazprom using Northern Corridor to the European market and Central Corridor, if I may, I could compare 30 BCM per year. That's gas supply to the European market for 25 years. That's the period we're looking at. So if you compare this, then Northern Corridor to through Central and Northern Corridor for Gazprom, it's $43 billion, American dollars, more efficient, means cheaper than through the Central Corridor. Plus hydrocarbon print. Today it's a fact. CO2 emissions and gas supplies in years is 9 million tons of CO2 less than in Uzhhorod corridor. I think the picture is pretty clear to us. And for example, when we talk about projects in Europe or in other countries are more economically attractive and interesting and efficient, first of all, would be talking about main pipelines going from our gas production centers through the territory of the Russian Federation. And based on that, we have and we build our own strategy. As regards Asian market, no doubt, Asian market, well, presently, Asian market is the most fast developing market and most promising one. And of course, I should stress the Indian market, but market number one would be Chinese market. And gas consumption in China in 2016 has increased by 7%, and consumption in China amounted to 205.8 BCM per year. And what's interesting, gas consumption in China exceeded the psychological threshold over 200 BCM. Just like in Europe, own volumes, own production do not cover the demand, and imports to the Chinese market in 2016 has increased by 22%, which is higher than the gas market growth in China. Besides, gas import in China is about 50-50. 50% pipeline gas and 50% LNG. It's worth mentioning here that in winter, for example, China covered its peak demand, first of all, at the expense of extra volumes of LNG. And that's what makes Chinese market different from the European, where peak demand in Europe in winter is covered at the expense of pipeline gas. Well, the reason is just one. The pipeline gas going from Central Asia, well, unfortunately, and I'm sure you all know this pretty well, they do not cover the peak demand characteristic of consumer markets, in particular Chinese market, covered peak demands at the expense of extra LNG supplies. Without a doubt, I can say that that Gazprom contract to supply Russian gas to China, 8 billion cubic meters, will significantly change this situation, and pipeline gas volumes will change and LNG will change. But I think that the most important thing here is that the Chinese government is gradually changing its policy with respect to gas and energy balance in China. At the moment, gas amounts to 6%, only 6%, and in the next 5 years, this is going to change, and the energy balance will look differently. Gas will amount to 8.3 to 10%. You realize that just 1% more in the energy balance with such consumption volumes, we're talking about tens of millions BCM of extra volumes. And it's quite clear. And we can see this clearly, that in the near future, gas consumption will be around 300 BCM and more. Naturally, that's quite impressive. This is huge demand for gas, and this includes pipeline gas as well. With great pleasure, I would like to say that in a very short period of time, Gazprom and our main K&K Chinese partner, we have established really good relationship, very constructive. We have signed a strategic partnership agreement with this company. And I must say that for the recent years, our partnership with K&K is now full of interesting things. We are working in many areas together, and it is indeed a strategic partnership. Of course, The basic project for us, the main project, is Sila Siberia, the eastern route. This is the route to China. And we are working with our Chinese colleagues. We have a number of negotiations with respect to gas supply to China. And we have reached an agreement to do more and supply more gas through this eastern route. And in the near future, jointly with our K&K partners, we are going to do more. We have already started this work. Gas will be supplied from Russian Far East to China, and we intend to achieve agreement on terms and conditions by the end of 2017. And first of all, our strategic partnership with K&K is developing in area of pipeline gas. What's most important is that recently and for some time now, we have reached agreement on other areas of cooperation as well. Well, first of all, it's underground storage for gas. And quite recently in China, within the framework of the forum that took place just several weeks ago, we have signed 3 contracts for joint implementation of gas storage projects. We have signed agreements on joint implementation of the gas generation project. I'm talking about power plant Sinyuan with 900 megawatts capacity. We have also signed an agreement on cooperation in gas motor fuel. We intend to build road from Europe to Western China. And I would also like to mention here that we have now agreed on many things with our partner K&K, and we have now come to terms with standards and other things, which means our partnership covers many areas, including issues related to material and technical resources, equipment supply for gas industry. So once again, I stress all these projects, all these agreements tell us that within a short period of time, we really managed to achieve quite a lot with our strategic Chinese partner, K&K.
Well, the gas supplies to Europe began in 1962, first to Austria. Next year, we're going to celebrate 50 years of gas supplies, not only to Austria, but also to the European market in general. And undoubtedly, this is a benchmark. It's a good anniversary, and today Gazprom and our European partners would hopefully come to this anniversary with some new record high sales that we can expect in the coming time.